When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, we are going to be asking the question, is it a sex issue or an adulting issue? And this is about men who feel that their wife doesn't have enough sex with them, but when you talk to them on a deeper level, you see there's a lot more going on, including their wife doesn't really do much. So it's not just sex that she doesn't do much else in the home, and just in terms of adulting. And we will get into that as soon as I tell you to subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was Don't Stop Your Kids from Dating, toward the anxious parents who perseverate on all the negative outcomes of their kids dating without understanding why they do that or what the benefits are to children of those relationships and adolescence. And the one before that was Stop with the Solution Hunting, about people who want a magic bullet cure for everything. Okay, so a lot of guys try to say they use their sex life as a proxy, and I talk about this all the time, like in my podcast, Sex is Not About Sex, and like a million others. And sex is not about sex, just like date night isn't about date night. So when a woman wants a man to plan date night, and he finally learns in couples therapy, okay, plan the fucking date night, right? So just get it on the calendar, figure it out, just do it like a work thing, and plan the date night. Well, then he plans a date night. They're sitting there at date night, and she realizes it wasn't about date night. It's about having a guy who would not mechanistically have to learn that, and who would want that, and who would want to connect. And it would be better to sit on the couch with somebody like that than to be on the date night with somebody that is just checking a box, right? It's the same thing with sex. So when guys do have more sex, because usually, you start couples therapy, people do start to have a bit more sex. And that's when because they want to say, all right, this is working, we're doing well, everything's good. But a lot of the time, it wasn't just about that, right? And that's what the guy sees. As soon as I have a podcast, you can likely get laid once more per week, but it won't help anything or something like that. And the truth of the matter is true. And you can't tell until it actually happens that it's true. That when you end up having a little bit more sex, or even a lot more sex, because let's say the woman gets on HRT, it gets on testosterone, right? So then you go from not having sex at all to having sex a couple times a week. And previously, the guy thought that would have been amazing. That would just change my life completely. It doesn't, because there's, it's still the same person that you were having trouble with. Sex is a proxy variable. She doesn't want, and she's not a different person. She's just like a person that now has a bit of a sex drive. Okay, cool. So what is actually going on, though, with some of these younger women that I see? Some of them are older, but in that case, you know why the drive is down. But there's younger women that they don't have sex, but then when you peer under the hood of the relationship, they're in this parent-child dynamic where the man is over-functioning, he's doing everything. And I link in this episode to my other episode, Are There Really Men Who Do Everything? And yes, there are, and these are the men. They are doing all the stuff in the home, they're doing a lot of the child care. Even if she's a stay-at-home mom, they're doing most of the chores, by the way. But if she works, certainly they're doing almost all of them, the cooking, the cleaning, the childcare, most of that stuff. She kind of does what she wants. She scrolls on the phone. Usually she's depressed or she has ADHD. And she kind of is like a child. And this is just like in the inverse, the gender inverse scenario where the man acts like the child. And it's usually a situation that's similar. He has depression or ADHD or just low competence. There are people who are just not very competent. And I talked about this with the weaponized incompetence or real incompetence. If you are somebody with low self-esteem, you probably married a person that you could control in some way, that you were smarter than. You're smarter than them, and you could out-talk them. I have podcasts when you can out-talk your spouse. And you did this because they couldn't leave you. You know, why would they ever leave you? You're so much better than them. You figure everything out. You do everything. You're in control of everything. Great. You know, that's your role that makes you feel safe as the overfunctioner. You become so integral to somebody's life that they can't leave you. And that's because of your own self-esteem issues, you know? And so you want to overfunction and be overcompetent. And so you find somebody that will let you do that, who already tends toward this childlike, underfunctioning, undercompetence role. And a lot of times early in the relationship, you could see this pattern start, right? So in this situation, we're talking about when it's a woman who's an underfunctioner, the guy starts driving her everywhere. He starts taking over all the bills. He starts taking care of the finances. He starts taking care of the cooking. He starts making sure she eats all the time and basically treating her like a baby. And so then when babies come on the scene, there's a little uptick in her desire and ability to caretake biologically. But then by the time the children are older, especially if the dynamic doesn't change at that point and the man is still over-functioning, it just goes back away, you know? And so she isn't, you know, she's another child, just like women say about the man, oh, he's like my third child. If the guy is kind of like this and not very competent and he's somebody that she really got subconsciously because she could tell him what to do and because she would be in charge of the relationship. Well, there's men who do the same thing, and they marry women who are very much not as smart as them, not as competent as them, and they tell themselves that she's smart in other ways, or, you know, when it's the honeymoon stage, it seems great and she's sweet and they're having sex and she looks up to him. But then things change. She doesn't want to have sex anymore the same way because, you know, she's older or the honeymoon stage is over, and she doesn't do hard things. She doesn't, you know, try to have sex, just like she doesn't try to cook or clean, just like she doesn't try to work or anything else, because she doesn't try. And that was kind of the dynamic from the beginning, is that her anxiety or her depression or her ADHD, whatever it was, rendered her basically a child. And often she still has not individuated from her family of origin. And I have posts on that, like when partners maintain a childlike role around their parents. And so some of these people are like professional children. You know, even in their friendships, they're kind of the one that's considered like cute and they get taken care of by other people, you know, and so this is their role. Their role is basically to receive care. And that role is very discordant with being a sexual adult. You know, when you're not in the glow of the honeymoon stage, it's very uncomfortable if your primary goal is basically to be taken care of by others and to be treated like a delightful child. That is very antithetical to the kind of agency and autonomy and confidence needed to be a sexual entity. And so at that point, the sexual entity part kind of drops off the map. And these are the cases. Now, most sexless marriages are pretty touchless and they are not very affectionate. But this is a subset of sexless marriage that can be very affectionate because the woman is a child in the psychological kind of dynamic of the relationship. So there are hugs and kisses and he rubs her back and her feet and all these things and, you know, takes care of everything, feeds her and everything like you would with a beloved child, but there's no sex, just like there wouldn't be with a beloved child. It's a full parent-child relationship. And so when the man pushes for sex in any way, it feels so uncomfortable and so discordant and such a harsh, you know, like awakening that the woman is actually expected to have some sort of adult self, but it feels very unfair because she doesn't have an adult self in any other regard in the marriage. And these are the guys that try to, quote, like I always say, take everything off her plate, but then she's still unhappy. And I explain that if you take everything off somebody's plate, they're not an adult anymore. So the guys are perpetuating this dynamic by allowing the woman to descend further and further into this kind of role of only being cared for and not caring for others. And sometimes she still can care for the children in some way, but not fully. You know, there's a huge, There's a huge dependence on helpers in order to do things with the kids. So if the man in this dynamic has to travel for work, frequently her mother will come over. Somebody will help, a family member, or if they're wealthy, she'll have paid help all the time. And it turns into a situation where she gets further and further away from the confidence that she would need to try out more things. So she tries out less and less. And he keeps thinking, despite this never having worked, that if he does more and more and more and more things that upset her, and everything upsets her because she gets anxious about it, because she's not done it in a while, because maybe she can't do it, who knows? But, usually she can do it. Like she has like the physical capacity, let's say, to, cook a meal for the family, but she's just anxious because she hasn't done it in so long. He never makes her do it, and in this situation, it's like if he died, let's say, would she start cooking for the kids? Probably not, honestly. Probably the panic at that moment would allow other people to come fill in. Her family would move in or start making all the meals, or somehow somebody would hire her some help, and then she'd remarry somebody that did the same thing without any insight. Now, can people with insight who recognize themselves in this description, can they get out of it? Sure. I mean, you can change any aspect of your life. As I say all the time, people could be drug addicts and change. So obviously, I deeply believe, and I see all the time, that people can change in any way. But you have to want to change. So you have to say, you know what, I don't want to be in this dynamic where people take care of everything for me, and, and I'm not really maximizing my potential as an adult, and I don't know really what I'm modeling. This is for a man or a woman. Right now, we're talking about the woman role. I talk about this with men also. With ADHD, I have a post on, I do everything in this marriage, my husband does nothing. And it was the same kind of thing. It's like both people have to want the dynamic to change. The person who underfunctions and the person who overfunctions. And I link in this podcast to the podcast on overfunctioning and underfunctioning. So if both people want to try to get out of their comfort zone, that may look like the person who never cooks starts to cook one meal a week, right? And then 2 meals, and eventually it's even. And they're like other couples who split cooking or cleaning or childcare or driving or whatever. You can't really be a sexual adult and also be a child. Like the brain does not allow that to happen, because children shouldn't be having sex. So then when you're in a role of a child, it's like kind of like your brain and your body stop you from having sex because you've reverted to a child self. And you want to kind of, in a healthy person, developmentally, you embrace any stage that you're in. You embrace older age, as I talk about all the time, and you also embrace being a healthy adult. When you're in the prime of your life as a healthy adult, you want to be kind of seeing what you could do and testing your boundaries and trying to be an autonomous person that is competent in a variety of areas so that you can show your children what it looks like to be a healthy and confident adult moving through the world who can do these various things that our society says adults should do: cooking, cleaning, driving, having friends over, having, some sort of work or volunteer, something that is a project that is, effective and helps other people, the ability to navigate social situations, to manage your finances, all of these things, right? So just whatever, quote, adulting is. So there's women that were doing this in their 20s, then they got married, and they weren't doing it maybe super well, or maybe their parents were helping with a lot of it, but then they married this kind of guy, this overfunctioner who's not confident about his ability to provide anything but instrumental help, and this workhorse type of guy. And he comes in, he takes over everything, so it's almost like she never fully launches into a full adult. And in that case, as I said, how are you going to have a sexual self? So sex is just the canary in the coal mine here. The reality is that this parent-child overfunctioner, underfunctioner dynamic is what needs to be interrogated and what needs to be worked on a deep level, because sex there is just a symptom. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything. To do with the real problem. The reason that the man is uncomfortable is not because he's not having sex. It'd be great to have sex, but the real thing that makes him feel weird is, why doesn't she do anything? Why does she do nothing? Why does our relationship look so different than that of the friends or coworkers or what I remember from my own parents? Why does she sit around all the time and I do everything? Like, that's kind of like the real shame. Like that's like what they really don't discuss. The sex thing, more people complain about it. So it feels like, okay, that's like a normal thing. Maybe I could discuss that I don't have sex. But the real weird thing going on is that not only does she not have sex, but she doesn't do anything. She doesn't do other things as well. And sometimes there's like worse than I'm saying. Sometimes there's like addiction going on. Sometimes there's a drinking problem that nobody's mentioning. Sometimes depression is so bad that she's not getting out of bed for days out of the month. She's stopped working because of it. There's, a huge anxiety about leaving the house or driving or socializing. And when I get these guys sometimes in therapy, it takes a long time before they tell me really how bad it is because they're embarrassed. They're embarrassed for her. They're embarrassed for themselves. They're embarrassed they let it get so bad. They're embarrassed they haven't reached out for help, that they haven't made her go to therapy or go to a doctor or go to AA or whatever the case may be. Anyway, I hope you guys got something out of this, and what you should have got out of it is if you're a man that has no idea how to bring this up with your wife, you should get into therapy and think about what the hell's going on. How did you let this crazy situation arise? Because it takes two always to tango. And if you're a woman that's in a situation where you're listening, you're like, well, I'm the one who does everything. And my male partner, he sits around, he does nothing, he doesn't work, he video games, does gaming and nothing all day, and he is depressed or he drinks. And yes, you also should get into therapy, obviously, and talk about it. But it is a lot more socially acceptable for women to say that the man does nothing in this culture, if he does nothing, than for a man to say that the woman does nothing. So the man who wants to say that his wife does nothing is going back up against kind of society in a way that in the 50s, a woman would be so embarrassed to say that the man does nothing. So it's actually flipped exactly in the way that I talk about in my podcast on younger working men are condescended to the way that stay-at-home moms used to be years ago. So it used to be like in the Mad Men in the 60s and 50s, 60s, if you had a husband who didn't have a job, that was like so embarrassing to have an unemployed husband, or to have a man who just wasn't doing what a quote man was supposed to do, which was being social and going to bowling or whatever the case may be, and being a pillar of the community, going to church, going to synagogue or whatever, and then having a job. Like a man was supposed to be this specific sort of adult character in the world. He wasn't supposed to do stuff at home, but except like mowing the lawn and that kind of thing. But he was supposed to do these things. And if your husband didn't do those things, then it would be so embarrassing, right? To have a husband who didn't fit the mold. Well, it's like very, very similar now. Like women in this culture are said to be these over-functioning, amazing goddesses, put on a pedestal, and they're just people. Guys in the 50s were just people too. And so if you have a woman that's an under-functioner, it's kind of really hard to say it. It's really embarrassing for the couple in the way that it would have been embarrassing in the time of Mad Men for a guy to lose his job. All right, so hopefully this made you think a little differently about this dynamic, and thank you as always for listening, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Have a great day.